was halfway through folding the beach towels when I heard the door open. They walked in, my parents holding luggage, laughing, thinking this was their rented house. They didn't know. Not yet. My father stopped mid-sentence. My mother's smile fell flat. 10 years since they disowned me. And now, they were standing in my foyer. Would you have said anything? I arrived late intentionally. The reunion was already in full swing when I pulled up near the cluster of beach houses our family rented every other summer. Laughter floated through the salt air like it belonged to someone else. I stayed in my car a moment longer than needed, letting the engine idle while I watched silhouettes move behind gauzy curtains and string lights. No one noticed I was there. When I finally stepped out, my sandals hit the gravel with a sound too loud in my ears. I smoothed my linen dress, adjusted the small box of wine I'd brought, and headed toward the back deck. The front door was clearly for guests who belonged. I'd been here before, but this time felt different, like I was just someone passing through, not a part of it. "Hi there." "Oh, hey," my cousin Becky said, halfway through a laugh with someone else as I stepped up to the deck. Her smile flickered when she saw me, like she wasn't sure she was supposed to acknowledge me. "They're inside." Inside. I followed the laughter down the hall, trailing the scent of rosemary and grilled peaches. No one turned. Not when I walked past the living room. Not when I stood awkwardly in the kitchen holding my wine and waiting for someone to make eye contact. Eventually, I poured myself a glass and leaned against the counter. My sister passed by, Heather, with her usual ease, dressed in something white and effortlessly coastal. She didn't look at me. My mother was in the dining room overseeing the seating chart like it was a royal banquet, names on tiny shell-shaped cards. I saw my name missing. Everyone else had a seat. Mine had been forgotten. "Oh, Meredith," she said finally, like I'd interrupted something. "We weren't sure you'd make it. You didn't RSVP. "I emailed," I replied, quiet but steady. "Right, well, there should be a folding chair somewhere if you want to grab it." A folding chair. That was it. No hug, no welcome. Just a mention of a metal seat I could find on my own. I nodded once, didn't ask for help, just stepped back outside, the laughter continuing behind me like a soundtrack to someone else's life. I found the folding chair in the garage. It was dusty and missing one of its rubber feet, so it rocked slightly when I set it up near the corner of the deck, just far enough from the main table to not be part of it, but close enough to hear every laugh, every clink of a glass. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was seated near the grill next to the recycling bin, while my father delivered his welcome home toast to everyone but me. Heather sat beside our parents, glowing. She'd just made partner at her firm. That was the headline of the night, repeated over deviled eggs and shrimp cocktail. "I always knew she'd go far," Uncle Frank said. "She's just like Joanne was at that age," Aunt Linda added, nodding toward my mother, who beamed. No one mentioned that I had just closed on my second real estate property. No one asked about my business or my recent interview on a local news channel. To them, I was still the one who left the East Coast, who got too into her independence. Someone asked if I was still living in that little apartment. I smiled and said yes. Let them picture me somewhere cramped and humble. It cost me nothing to let them believe it. Later, during dinner, my chair wobbled every time I shifted. I sat through the meal mostly in silence, responding only when directly spoken to. The food was good, my father always did the grilling, and I focused on chewing slowly, letting the noise pass over me like waves. My brother's kids ran around barefoot. Heather laughed too loud at her own joke. Someone dropped a fork. The world spun on like I wasn't even there. After dessert, my mother stood up and held her glass. To family, she said, eyes scanning the table, to the ones who show up, who stay. I felt it land, soft but deliberate. No one looked at me, not directly. I stared at the melting ice in my cup. The condensation had formed a ring on the wooden railing beside me. I traced it with my finger over and over until someone finally spoke to me. "Meredith, you still doing that freelancing thing?" It was my cousin Stephen. He didn't mean anything by it. He never did. "I am," I said. I didn't elaborate. He nodded and turned back to his plate. The stars had started to appear by then, faint and tentative above the trees. I watched them instead of the family slideshow now playing on the patio screen. Old photos, mostly Heather Birthday's graduations group shots where I was always at the edge if I was in them at all. I leaned back in my chair, careful not to let it tip. At some point, I stood up. No one noticed. My cup was still on the railing, half full, slowly warming in the night air. I left it there. I walked down the steps and into the yard, away from the glow of the fairy lights. The grass was damp, cool against my sandals. I paused near the old oak tree where we used to tie a swing when we were kids. The rope was gone now, the branch bare and smooth. I touched it anyway, fingers brushing bark that felt familiar and indifferent all at once. Behind me, the laughter rolled on. A new slideshow segment must have started Heather's wedding photos, most likely. I heard her laugh, that crisp, confident sound that always filled the room. I didn't hate it. I just didn't belong to it. A soft rustle to my left startled me. It was Aunt Miriam cradling a glass of white wine and a plate of fruit. She didn't say anything, just nodded toward me with a tired smile, and then sat on the garden bench without waiting for permission. "I always liked this spot," she said after a moment. "Out of the way. You see more from here." I didn't respond. She didn't expect me to. We sat like that for several minutes, silent but not uncomfortable. A moth fluttered toward the porch light. Distant music played from someone's Bluetooth speaker, barely audible beneath the murmur of conversation. "You bought something recently, didn't you?" she asked eventually. I turned to her. "Excuse me, I thought I heard your name on the radio last week. Something about a property deal near the coast." I blinked. She sipped her wine, unbothered. "I listen to the local news when I drive. Keeps me from screaming in traffic." I gave a small laugh, quiet and short-lived. "Yeah," I said finally. "I closed on a place. Beachfront." Miriam nodded slowly. "Good for you." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, but for the first time that evening, I felt seen. As I walked back toward the deck, someone inside started calling for group photos, the kind where everyone has to pretend they like each other for 10 seconds. I didn't go back up the steps. I circled around instead, staying in the shadows, letting my sister gather her spotlight and my parents take center stage. That night when I got in my car, I didn't turn the engine on right away. I sat in the dark, hands resting on the steering wheel. I thought about what it meant to show up, about how sometimes being present didn't mean being visible. It just meant knowing quietly, deeply who you were when no one else cared to ask. I reversed out of the driveway without saying goodbye. Behind me, the house was still lit, full of voices that didn't pause when I left, and that was fine. The week after the reunion, my mother sent a group text thanking everyone for making the day so special. My name wasn't mentioned. Neither was the fact that I'd left early. I stared at the message for a long time. Not out of surprise, but because of how normal it felt. Like I had finally become so forgettable that even my absence didn't register. Later that evening, I scrolled through the photo album Heather uploaded. Every picture was carefully filtered smiles, wide arms, linked tables filled with food and matching centerpieces. One photo stopped me, the long table shot. Everyone was seated, drinks raised. And there, dead center, was the empty chair that had been mine, tucked in like no one had ever sat there. The caption read, "Best memories with the best people." I didn't comment. I didn't like the photo. I just turned off my phone and walked outside. It was getting colder in the evenings. Autumn was settling in slowly, the kind that crept in beneath your sleeves before you realized you were shivering. I pulled my sweater tighter and listened to the wind rattle through the trees lining my yard. My neighbor, Mrs. Brennan, waved from her porch. She was in her 70s and made it a habit to notice everything but say little. That night, though, she called out, "Everything all right, dear?" I smiled politely, just taking in the air. She gave a knowing nod and disappeared inside. That small exchange made me realize something. I'd spent so long shrinking myself around my family that even the simplest kindness from a stranger felt revolutionary. 2 days later, I got an invitation. Not from Heather, from Mom. It was for Heather's baby shower. Pink envelope, gold letters, RSVP to Heather directly. I almost laughed. I hadn't spoken more than 5 sentences to Heather in over a year. At the reunion, she didn't make eye contact. She didn't even acknowledge the card I'd left with a small gift inside, and now I was expected to show up with a smile and a present and pretend none of that mattered. I placed the invitation on my kitchen counter and left it there for days unopened until the RSVP deadline passed. Then the texts started. From Heather, "Hey, just checking if you're coming to the shower. Would be great to see you." Then from Mom, "Don't make this about you. It's a family event." That one hit differently. A familiar sting. The kind of message that didn't just ask, it demanded, and it carried the unspoken weight of years of being told to fall in line, to not ruin the mood, to put others first, even when they never considered me. I didn't reply. I didn't block them either. I let the silence speak. The weekend of the baby shower came and went. I stayed home and baked banana bread, not because I particularly wanted to eat it, but because the act of measuring and stirring and timing made sense when so little else did. By Sunday evening, my phone buzzed again. Heather had tagged me in a story. Curious, I opened it. The video was short. Pan over a crowd of laughing women, balloons tied to chairs, gifts piled in a corner. The camera paused briefly, long enough to catch my mother saying, "It's just so nice when everyone shows up and supports Heather. She deserves this." Then a toast and cheers. I wasn't sure what I felt. Anger, maybe. But it was quieter than that, like the dull ache of something you'd learned not to touch because it would always hurt. Later that night, I got a voicemail from Mom. "Hi, sweetie. I hope everything's okay. I know you didn't make it, but just wanted to let you know that Heather really missed you. And so did we. Family's not perfect, but we try. You're always welcome if you want to be included. If you want to be included." It wasn't the first time she framed it like that. Like belonging was an option I had to choose correctly, not something I was owed. Like it was a door I'd forgotten how to knock on, even though I had once lived inside. That week, I bumped into Uncle Ray at the grocery store. He looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Didn't realize you were back in town," he said. "I wasn't back. I'd lived here for over 6 years. When I told him that, he blinked. "Well, maybe if you came around more." The sentence hung unfinished. He clapped me on the shoulder and moved on. By Thursday, I got another message, this time from my cousin Emily. She was getting married in December. Destination wedding. Small guest list. She wanted me to help organize flights for the family, not attend. Organize. Apparently, I knew how to handle logistics better than anyone. I read it twice, then deleted it. This had become the pattern. I wasn't part of the celebrations, but I was welcome behind the curtain. I could be the helper, the fixer, the name they mentioned only when something needed to be done, not when someone deserved to be seen. I remembered a moment from years ago at Heather's graduation. I had stayed up all night fixing her slideshow. She gave a thank you speech that day, and she thanked everyone except me. Afterward, Mom had said, "You should be proud you helped." That's enough, isn't it? It wasn't. But I had nodded anyway. That memory returned to me now like a slow echo finally catching up. And I realized they weren't just forgetting me. They were choosing to erase me in public while still expecting my labor in private. This time, I wouldn't play along. A few days later, I visited Mom to drop off some paperwork she needed for her taxes. The house looked the same. Familiar, but not warm. Heather's baby gifts were piled neatly in the corner, still wrapped in pastel bows. On the coffee table sat a guest book from the shower. I skimmed a few pages. My name wasn't there, not even in absentia. Mom didn't mention it either. Instead, she launched into stories about Heather's nursery setup and how Aunt Lydia had brought her famous lemon pie. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You know, you could take notes from your sister. She's really embracing the idea of family." I didn't answer. There was no safe way to respond. Mom poured me a cup of coffee and changed the subject, but the sentence lingered like smoke in a closed room. As I reached for a sugar packet, I saw a photo frame tucked behind the ceramic rooster on the kitchen counter. A picture of Heather, Dad, and Mom, arms around each other at the baby shower. I wasn't even in the background. I left soon after. That night, I pulled out an old album from the back of my closet. One from a summer trip to Cape May when we were kids. I flipped through pages, Heather building sandcastles, Dad grilling Mom reading under an umbrella, then a photo of me holding a shell like it was a treasure. I remembered how proud I had been of that shell. I also remembered how they'd tossed it later, calling it just another rock. that quiet dismissal so small, then had never really left me. And it wasn't about the shell. It was about being the one whose joys were always seen as overreactions, the one who tried too hard or read too much into things, the one who was useful but not cherished, the one who was there but not really seen. By the end of the week, I declined another invitation, not a real one. Heather wanted help setting up a baby registry. I texted back a simple, "Sorry, I can't." No explanation, no apology. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty. Instead, I sat on my own back porch, coffee in hand, the sound of waves in the distance, my beach house, quiet, steady mine, and I began to wonder what would happen if, for once, they came to me. The invitation arrived on a Thursday. Not a call, not even a message, just a group email from Heather's Gmail, subject family reunion, RSVP, by June 1st, location, Ridgeview Lakeside Resort, date, July 4th weekend. I stared at the screen. There was no personal note, no hope you can come, not even a hi, just a list of names. Mine included somewhere in the middle, right after cousin Jared, who hasn't spoken to anyone since 2012. I reread the email twice, wondering if it was a mistake or, worse, an obligation. Later that night, I called Mom. "Did you know about this reunion thing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Oh yes, Heather's organizing it. Isn't it lovely, a proper family get-together finally?" I waited for her to add something, anything, but she didn't. She didn't say we'd really love you to come. She didn't say it wouldn't be the same without you. She said it's Heather's event, as if I were being notified, not invited. I hung up soon after and sat in silence. Outside, the moonlight washed over the sand dunes that bordered my porch. The sea whispered steady things I couldn't quite hear. I thought of the last family gathering I attended, Heather's engagement party. I'd flown in early, helped Mom with the catering, even ironed Dad's shirt last minute. Heather hadn't acknowledged it once, and when she introduced the family to her fiancé's parents, she listed everyone's degrees and careers. When she got to me, she just said, "This is my sister. She's based out of state, that's all." I had smiled then because it seemed easier than correcting her. Now I wasn't sure I wanted to smile anymore. I ended up replying to the email 3 days later. Just one word confirmed. No emojis, no follow-up. When July 4th finally rolled around, I arrived just before sunset. The Ridgeview Lakeside Resort looked like a postcard, maple trees lining the gravel path, a wide wooden deck overlooking still water and soft music playing from hidden speakers tucked in the eaves. There were already cars parked out front, most of them familiar. I stepped inside, suitcase in hand, wearing a navy dress and flats. Understated, quiet, nothing flashy. Heather looked up from across the lobby. Her mouth curled slightly, not quite a smile, more like a wince she didn't want anyone to see. "Oh, you came." "I did," I said simply. She turned back to the concierge without replying. My room was at the far end of the West Wing, room 209. Not with the rest of the family, who were placed in a block around the garden suite. At dinner that night, the long banquet table had name cards. I found mine placed at the far corner next to an empty seat marked vendor liaison. No one said why. Mom waved vaguely when I sat down. Dad was busy discussing Heather's new nonprofit. The air smelled of rosemary chicken and some kind of fig glaze. Silverware clinked softly. Wine flowed generously. I didn't speak much. I nodded when spoken to, laughed when expected, kept my hands folded in my lap. At one point, someone complimented Heather's necklace. She beamed, leaned forward and said it was a gift from the foundation board for securing our biggest donor yet. People clapped. Mom looked proud. No one asked where I'd been or what I'd built. I excused myself after dessert and walked down to the dock. The lake shimmered in the moonlight. Boats drifted quietly nearby. I sat on a bench and let my breath catch up. Then I heard footsteps behind me, familiar ones. It was Aunt Marianne. She sat beside me slowly, the old wooden bench creaking beneath her. "I didn't think you'd actually come," she said, gazing at the lake. "I wasn't sure I would either." Silence stretched between us. Then quietly she added, "They don't talk about it. But I know about the beach house." My fingers froze on my lap. I overheard Linda last Thanksgiving. She continued referring to my mother with her first name as always. She was saying how it would look complicated if people found out it was you who signed the new lease contract for the whole Eastern Bluff. I didn't respond, just looked out over the water. Marianne sighed. You know your mom? She doesn't always realize when she's hiding shame with pride. I turned to her. Why tell me this now? Because I've seen you disappear quietly for years, and I just wanted to say I saw you. Even when they didn't. Her voice wasn't dramatic. It was steady, almost clinical, but that made it hit harder. I didn't cry, but I did nod. And for the first time that weekend, I felt anchored. The next morning was the group hike. Everyone was dressed in athletic wear chatting by the trailhead. I arrived last wearing the same shoes I'd worn since college, scuffed but still comfortable. Heather spotted me. You sure you want to do this? It's kind of steep. I smiled. I'll manage. 10 minutes in, I was ahead of half the group. By the time we reached the clearing overlooking the lake, I was standing alone near the edge. It was quiet up there. Wind brushed through the trees. Below, the water looked like a silver mirror. Someone from behind asked, You used to hike this with Dad, right? It was my cousin Jake. I nodded. Every summer. Before he stopped asking, he shifted awkwardly. He talks about those hikes sometimes, says he misses how easy things were. I didn't answer, because what was there to say? That night after dinner, as the rest of the family gathered for group photos in front of the fireplace, someone handed me the camera. Would you mind? Heather asked sweetly. I took it, stepped back, framed the shot, clicked, then clicked again, and one more time zoomed out wide, catching the whole group under the crest above the mantle that read, The Bennett Legacy, Estorder 1957. I handed the camera back. No one asked me to join, but I didn't mind, because I was starting to remember something they never learned. Just because you're not in the picture doesn't mean you weren't part of the story. The day before the big dinner, I found myself walking along the edge of the cliffside trail that wound above the beach. The wind pulled at my sweater and gulls screamed overhead. Below, the ocean heaved steady and ancient. A kind of calm washed over me there, like the sea knew everything but didn't need to say it aloud. I paused at the edge, looking down at the stretch of sand now shaded by the resort's massive pergolas and new deck chairs. That was the same view from the deck of the beach house, the same angle I had when I signed the deal to renovate the property 2 years ago. No one in the family knew I'd been the one to lease it to Halridge Estates. They just assumed the beach had been purchased by some developer. That assumption served everyone, I suppose. When I turned back, I saw Ava, my niece Heather's daughter, standing a few paces away. She must have followed me quietly. You really like coming up here? She asked. I smiled. It's peaceful. She tucked her hands into her sleeves. Dad says the wind makes people act dramatic. I laughed softly. Maybe he just doesn't like hearing things blow around that he can't control. Ava didn't reply right away. Then she said I heard them talking last night. Grandma and Aunt Heather. They said you made a scene at the hike. I raised an eyebrow. I didn't say anything. I know, she said. That's why I was confused. We stood there in silence, the kind that doesn't feel uncomfortable, just full. Back at the house, preparations for the formal dinner were in full swing. It was the reunion's final event, the one where everyone dressed up and pretended we were still a cohesive family. Table settings were being argued over, wine pairings debated. Someone mentioned a toast. I stood in the hallway watching my mother direct the florist about centerpiece placement. Her hands were animated, precise, controlling everything down to the angle of each orchid stem. Heather stood beside her, nodding approval. They didn't see me, or maybe they did and chose not to acknowledge it. Either way, I turned and walked away. Later that afternoon, as I sat on the porch with a book, a man in a tailored navy blazer approached. He was holding a clipboard, his step confident, but not rushed. Ms. Carter? He asked. Yes, I'm Marcus Quinn, lead property manager for Halridge Estates. My spine straightened. I just wanted to confirm tomorrow's walkthrough time for the Bennett Beach property, he continued, glancing down at the clipboard. The client, meaning you, had requested discretion regarding ownership, but the team has been briefed for silent protocol. I nodded once, a signal to lower his voice. Ava was nearby, reading on the porch swing. He got the message. Understood. I'll see you tomorrow at 9 a.m. Enjoy your evening, Ms. Carter. He walked away just as smoothly as he came. I looked over. Ava had lifted her gaze from her book. You own the beach house, she asked, like she'd just cracked a secret code. I met her eyes, calm. I just manage a few things. She blinked, then smirked. Dad's gonna die. I gave the tiniest shrug. Let's not rush it. She burst out laughing, then quickly covered her mouth, aware we weren't supposed to be loud. I didn't laugh, but I smiled, a small, quiet thing that settled somewhere deep. That evening, the rehearsal dinner unfolded in slow, syrupy awkwardness. Everything was perfectly arranged, linen napkins folded like swans, name cards scripted in gold ink, a harpist playing softly in the corner. But perfection has a sharp edge when the people seated around the table are pretending. I was placed at the far end again, this time next to Uncle Ray, who had a habit of chewing with his mouth open and launching into wubby-yabby trivia without prompting. I didn't mind the corner seat. It gave me an angle to observe. Heather, of course, sat next to our parents. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon. Every now and then she leaned in to whisper something to Mom, who smiled tightly in response. Their dynamic hadn't changed in decades. Heather directed. Mom approved. Ava caught my eye from across the room and gave me a quick wink. I raised my glass subtly in return. As the salad course was cleared, my cousin Jonah stood to make a toast. He was always the comic relief in the family, someone who knew how to diffuse tension without naming it. His words were kind, slightly self-deprecating, filled with just enough warmth to make people laugh without really feeling anything. After him, Heather stood. The room grew still with attention. I just want to thank everyone for being here, she began, voice smooth. Family means everything to me, and hosting this reunion has reminded me of how lucky we are to share this bond, this legacy. She let her gaze move slowly across the table, skipping right over me. And while not everyone was able to contribute, I know we all tried in our own way. My stomach tightened, not at her words, but at the calculated vagueness of them. Enough to sting, not enough to call out. I didn't react. I reached for my glass, took a slow sip, and let the clink of crystal settle the silence. The rest of the night passed in fragments, dessert more forced laughter, Dad telling a story I'd heard since childhood. I listened with half an ear, my eyes drifting toward the tall glass doors that led to the terrace. Beyond them, the ocean pulsed under moonlight. Later, I slipped out without saying goodbye. Back in my room, I found an envelope slid under my door. No name, just my room number, written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a short note. I know what you did with the house. Good call. They never deserved it. There was no signature. I folded the note, stared at it for a long moment, then tucked it into the back pocket of my journal. Not because I needed the validation, but because someone had noticed. The next morning, I rose early. The house was still quiet. Birds outside the screened porch were beginning their chorus, but inside the Carter house was a cocoon of silence. I padded barefoot to the kitchen, careful not to wake anyone. The coffee maker hummed, the only sound in the room. I sat at the counter, wrapped in a cardigan, nursing my coffee like a shield. I thought of the note again. I know what you did with the house. I hadn't told anyone, not even Ava, not even when the paperwork cleared, not even when the last wire transfer went through and the deed shifted to my name. The beach house, our so-called family legacy, was mine now. And yet someone knew. By mid-morning, the house began to stir. I heard the creak of upstairs floorboards, the water running in distant bathrooms, the occasional thud of luggage. One by one, the family emerged, fresh-faced, dressed, rehearsing cheerfulness like lines in a play. I slipped out to the beach. The tide had gone out, leaving long ribbons of wet sand glinting in the sun. I walked until the house was just a speck behind me, just another elegant outline against the trees. This stretch of coastline was where we'd once built castles, run screaming into the surf, buried each other in sand until the sun dipped below the waves. We had called it ours for years. I sat on a driftwood log, the wind tugging at my sleeves. That afternoon was the final group photo. Heather had hired a photographer complete with drones and lighting reflectors. Everyone was told to wear neutral coastal tones. Heather handed out scarves to the women, all in matching ivory. Mine was missing. When I asked, she blinked innocently. "Oh, I didn't think you'd be in the shot," she said, and walked away before I could respond. Ava stepped beside me quietly and handed me her scarf. "You're not invisible, you know." "I don't need it," I said, offering a small smile. "But thank you." I took the scarf anyway, not because I wanted to match, but because I wanted them to see I didn't need to ask for inclusion. I stood in the back row. No one moved to make space, so I stepped up onto the stone ledge behind them, just enough to be visible in the final frame. The photographer didn't ask questions, he simply clicked. The shutter flashed. Afterward, Heather looked at me like I had broken some unspoken rule. But I was done playing by rules that only applied to me. That evening, while everyone gathered for dinner, I stayed back. I returned to the edge of the property where the deed boundaries ended, where our shared memories became legal lines. I walked past them. This land, this view, this house, it was mine now. I stood at the patio staring back at the dining room where they were toasting without me again. They hadn't asked where I'd gone. They didn't notice I wasn't in the seat assigned. And that was fine, because tomorrow they would know. The final brunch was set for Sunday at 11. Heather called it Farewell and Family Futures, printed menus, linen napkins, place cards again. This time, I wasn't even on the seating chart. "I think they thought you'd left early," Aunt Denise said, with a hint of apology. "You weren't at dinner last night." I nodded. I was here. I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. The others trickled in laughter, echoing louder than usual, like they were performing for someone watching. Eli was at the center again, retelling his story about the portfolio deal in Miami. Heather, of course, beamed beside him. They were the golden couple. My absence didn't register, or maybe it did, and they enjoyed the void I created. I stayed standing near the entry, scanning the room. My scarf from yesterday hung neatly on a hook. Heather had taken it back. Funny how something borrowed in kindness could be reclaimed in pettiness. At 11:15, just as the mimosas were being poured and the servers began to set out the fruit platters, a silver sedan pulled into the gravel driveway. A tall woman in a navy pantsuit stepped out, followed by a man holding a slim leather portfolio. Both wore discreet name tags, Rhonda Green Hallmark and Green Title. Heather's face twitched. "Who's that?" she asked, already rising from her chair. I walked toward the patio doors and met Rhonda halfway. "Morning," she said with a warm, neutral smile. "Ms. Monroe?" I nodded. "Yes?" Ready to finalize the walkthrough. "Of course," I replied, voice calm. By then, most of the table had turned. Chairs scraped, napkins fell. Heather was already by my side. "I'm sorry, what's going on?" Rhonda glanced at her professionally. "Oh, are you a family member? We're here to walk the property before the official announcement goes public." "Announcement?" Heather asked, voice sharp. I turned to her. "The trust closed 3 weeks ago. The property changed hands then." Eli appeared beside his wife, lips pressed into a flat line. "What are you talking about?" "This house," I said simply. "It's no longer under the family estate. I bought it." For a moment, no one said anything. Then Eli laughed, short, disbelieving. "That's not possible. The board would have notified us. You don't have that kind of capital, Malena." I tilted my head. "Apparently I do." Rhonda opened her leather folder and pulled out a set of papers. Title transfer, legal filings, closing confirmation. "You're welcome to read them." Heather didn't take the papers. Her eyes darted to the windows as if checking who else had heard. They all had. Dad rose from his chair, slowly, fork still in hand. "Malena." "When?" "While you were debating whether I should stay in the guest cottage," I said. "I made an offer. It was accepted. The estate needed liquidity, remember, but this was our tradition," Aunt Denise whispered. "No," I said gently. "It was mine. You just came along for the pictures." The silence that followed was dense, awkward, and oddly satisfying. Heather stepped back as if the papers Rhonda held were contagious. Her fingers clenched the back of a dining chair, white-knuckled. "I just don't understand," she said, voice brittle. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" I looked at her carefully. "When exactly would you have listened?" Behind her, Eli whispered something to Dad. Their expressions shifted, calculation surfacing beneath the shock. But neither moved forward. Not yet. "I thought we agreed." Heather continued, still trying to save face. This house was going to stay in the family. It did, I said softly. I'm still family. Or did that change without notice? Someone behind me let out a quiet breath. Aunt Denise, perhaps. I didn't turn to look. Rhonda cleared her throat professionally. We'll just begin a quick walkthrough inside if that's all right. Of course. I stepped aside and let her pass. As she entered the foyer, I followed. The heavy door closed behind me with a quiet thud final clean. From inside, I could still hear murmurs from the brunch table. But they were distant now, like static on a fading radio station. I walked through the hall, slowly touching the edge of the stair banister, the sun-warmed wood of the built-in cabinets. Everything looked exactly the same. And yet it wasn't. In the dining room, a long row of framed family photos still hung on the wall. Most were of Heather's wedding, Eli's law firm celebration, even Mom's retirement brunch. My face appeared only once in the corner of a blurry Christmas photo standing half behind the tree. I didn't take them down. I didn't need to. When I returned to the patio, the energy had shifted. Mom was seated again, her face unreadable. Dad had his arms crossed, staring past me at the horizon. Heather still stood, her expression flickering between disbelief and something else, hurt maybe, but the performance was crumbling. The audience wasn't playing along anymore. From her seat near the end of the table, my cousin Nora leaned forward slightly. You bought the house, she asked. No sarcasm, no edge, just curiosity. I nodded. Nora glanced toward Mom, then Heather. Honestly, that's kind of amazing. Heather turned sharply. Nora, this is a private matter. She signed the papers. It's public record, Nora replied, unbothered. I caught the flicker of smiles from two other cousins. Small, respectful, not pitying recognition. Eli stepped toward me, then arms folded. You went behind everyone's back. You blindsided your own family. I shook my head. I didn't lie. I didn't hide. I simply stopped explaining. He scoffed. So this is revenge? No, I said quietly. This is real estate. The line landed like a soft punch, unexpected and oddly final. Dad stood now. Slowly, like the weight of his blazer had tripled. His expression was taut, like something inside him had cracked but refused to show it openly. This is still our family home, he said, voice low but firm. I didn't flinch. Then maybe the family should have thought of that before excluding one of its own. No one responded. Not Mom, not Heather, not Eli. The wind stirred again, and a linen napkin fluttered off the edge of the table, landing silently on the flagstone patio like a truce no one offered. I'll be making a few changes, I said. Minor renovations, nothing dramatic, but the house needs some repairs. Heather snapped back to life. You're not tearing it down, are you? I turned to her, surprised by the panic in her voice. Of course not. I respect what this house meant to all of us, even if that respect wasn't mutual. Rhonda reappeared then, a file tucked under her arm. Inspection walk-through, complete. Nothing urgent, but I've noted a few foundational shifts in the sunroom. The one you all refused to let me sleep in during reunions, I said almost to myself. Heather's eyes flickered. You can forward everything to my email, I told Rhonda. Will do. She replied with a smile, then nodded respectfully, and walked off her heels, echoing softly as she disappeared down the stone steps. I stood at the edge of the patio, letting the silence stretch. Behind me, chairs creaked. No one dared speak first. I didn't need them to. Instead, I turned to Eli, then to Heather. Next time there's a reunion, I said, send an invite. You might be surprised who pays the mortgage. I didn't say it with venom, just fact. Heather opened her mouth, then closed it. I walked past the table, slowly feeling the gravity shift with each step. Nora looked up at me, eyes wide with something like pride. Aunt Denise gave a single solemn nod. As I reached the door, I paused. Mom. I said, not turning around. If you'd asked, I would have said yes. Her voice came quietly. Asked what? To help, to be part of it, to matter. I didn't wait for a reply. Inside the house, the air was cooler, more still. The family portrait in the foyer caught my eye again. Heather at the center, me off to the side, half out of frame. I walked past it. This time I didn't look back. I didn't go back to the house for 2 days. I stayed in the guest cottage Rhonda had booked for me. Quiet, detached, with enough space to think. Every morning I watched the ocean swell beyond the dunes, letting the waves remind me how to breathe again. No calls from Mom, no texts from Heather. Eli had tried once. I let it ring. The third morning, a soft knock came at the door just after sunrise. It was Aunt Denise. She didn't bring drama, just a thermos of coffee and a quiet nod. We sat on the porch, our legs wrapped in old wool blankets. "You did what needed doing," she said after a long silence. I looked at her not with surprise, but with something close to gratitude. "I didn't want to humiliate them," I said. "You didn't," she replied. "You simply stopped hiding what was already true." We sipped our coffee, watching seagulls swoop low over the shoreline. She glanced at me. "Your father's been quiet. That's how I know it hit him." I nodded, unsure what to do with that information. "He used to say you were too sensitive," she added. "But I always thought you were just observant. There's a difference." That made me smile faintly. After she left, I opened my laptop and began reviewing the inspection report Rhonda had sent. Water damage in the east hallway, rotting deck boards, minor issues but symbolic in their own way, neglect layered on top of nostalgia. That afternoon, Rhonda joined me again, this time with a folder of renovation bids. "Do you want to meet with contractors?" she asked. I hesitated. "Not yet. What about the family? Should I notify them before we schedule?" I looked up. "They've been notified." She understood and nodded. Later that night, I walked back up the hill to the main house. It was empty now. Everyone had left after the reunion crumbled into something too fragile to salvage. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. It smelled like old pine and lemon polish. Familiar, but faded. I moved through each room, slowly pausing where the arguments had sparked, where the laughter had once felt real. In the kitchen, a single spoon sat in the sink, Heather's probably. In the living room, the fireplace held half-burned logs from the last night. I sat on the couch alone. Not lonely, just still. And that was the difference now. I walked through the hallway, the one with faded family portraits hung crookedly. Some still held my younger face, awkward smile, unsure eyes. Others had been updated over the years, except mine. That absence had always said more than any word could. In the dining room, the long oak table still bore scratches from old Thanksgiving fights, forks, slammed down chairs shoved back too hard. I ran my hand over one jagged groove, remembering the time I spilled gravy and got scolded, while Heather laughed untouched. I opened the sideboard and pulled out the guest book. The last entry had been from Dad's old friend Gary. "Beautiful house. Beautiful family." It felt like a staged caption for a picture that didn't tell the full story. I flipped back a few pages. There I was, 11 years old, writing in crooked cursive, "I love being here. I feel happy." I closed the book and set it down. The sun had dipped lower by now, casting long amber beams across the room. Dust danced in the light like memories reluctant to settle. I headed upstairs past the room that used to be mine. Still pale yellow, still with the bookshelf I built myself at 16. The mattress was gone, replaced with crates of holiday decorations and storage bins marked Heather, College. I didn't open them. At the end of the hallway was my parents' bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, everything was meticulously made. My mother's perfume still lingered faintly in the air, a powdery floral scent that used to comfort me. Now it just felt foreign. I sat on the edge of the bed. For a moment, I let my shoulders drop. Let my breath sink. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope I'd been carrying since the lawyer's office. Inside, the revised deed proof of full ownership, the estate documents. Rhonda had insisted I hold on to them until I was ready. I placed the envelope on the dresser. Next to it, I left a note in my handwriting. "This house always meant something to me, but I finally understand I don't need it to prove who I am. I didn't sign it." Downstairs again, I passed the front door, stopped, turned back. In the corner near the fireplace stood an old box of forgotten beach toys, plastic shovels, cracked buckets, faded frisbees, the kind of things we used to fight over during summer visits. I bent down and picked up a red pail, its handle half snapped. For some reason I carried it out with me as I left. Outside the air smelled like salt and cedar. The sea murmured in the distance. It was neither an ending nor a beginning, just the quiet middle ground where something had finally settled. The lock clicked behind me. I walked down the hill slowly, the pail swinging lightly at my side, empty and light. The path curved gently down to the cove where the tide had started to pull away, leaving behind patterns in the sand like delicate etchings. I walked slowly, letting the wind lift strands of my hair, letting the moment breathe. Down the beach, a group of kids were building something with driftwood and determination. One girl had her hands on her hips, barking orders, while the others followed, giggling. I smiled at the sight, not out of nostalgia but recognition. I used to be her. I sat on a weathered log pail, still in hand. The wood was cool against my skin, the breeze steady. I watched a gull circle and then dive, scatter droplets into the air. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Rhonda. "Just heard from your father." "He knows." I stared at the screen. "No, are you okay?" "No, we're sorry. Just that they knew." I placed the phone beside me on the log and looked out to the water. It didn't matter anymore. Not really. Recognition had come, but it had arrived too late to mean what they thought it might. A slow crunch of footsteps came from behind. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. Claire. The voice was hesitant. My mother's. I still didn't turn. She stopped a few feet away. We came by the house, saw the envelope. Silence stretched between us like a tightrope. I didn't offer to break it. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "I didn't realize how far apart we'd grown." I let the wind answer her. The waves. She moved closer, sitting carefully on the other end of the log. "Your father thought you left the key on the table to make a point." I finally turned to look at her. It wasn't a point, it was a door. Her eyebrows drew together. "A door for you. To walk through or not. That's not up to me." She didn't reply right away. Just looked at me with eyes that had grown softer since the last time they'd judged me across the dinner table. Behind us, the kids cheered. One of them had balanced a seashell tower without it toppling. "I don't expect things to be fixed," she said, "but I'd like to try, if you're open to that." I nodded slowly. "Maybe one day." She reached out instinctively, brushing sand off the back of my hand, then hesitated. I stood, not in rejection, just readiness. The red pail swung again at my side. As I walked back toward the town, toward whatever was next, I felt no vindication. No need for it, only a quiet fullness. They had frozen when they learned the truth, not because I demanded their recognition, but because the silence I carried had spoken louder than any declaration. They finally saw me. Not as the child at the edge of every photo or the sister seated near the kitchen, but as the woman who didn't need the house to prove she had always belonged. The pail hit my leg gently with each step, like punctuation. And somewhere in the distance behind me on that beach, someone finally whispered the words I'd waited a lifetime to hear. I didn't know she built it all herself. I didn't turn. I just kept walking. Some women raise their voices, some raise their hands. And then there are those who raise the bar quietly, relentlessly, until the world has no choice but to look up and notice. She never asked to be seen. She just stopped shrinking. And that was enough.